One of the hardest parts of making a new character is deciding what character. It potentially contributes to your fun for years to come, and so naturally we want to make the right choice. In a first for the channel, we're going to do a little bit of a ranking video today, and I'm going to break down all 48 subclasses by general power, their complexity, and how niche they are. But first, many thanks to subscriber Twinsteel, who shipped me his copy of the Player's Handbook in order for me to review it. And all he asks is that you check out some of the other underrated creators that he enjoys. So today, I'm happy to shout out Josh, the GM Philosopher, and have a video at the end for you to check out so that you can see just what he's about. One of the things that I don't like about ranking videos is they come with a lot of bias towards a specific niche or style of play, and so I'm going to try and break these down to open that up a little bit by including today a ruling on basically the general power of a class, so that if one is just stacked with more options or more overall overwhelming force and opportunity than another, then it'll be at the top of the list, but also with a listing on how complex the classes are to play, so that you can lean towards the less complex if you prefer a simple character, or towards the more if you prefer something with lots of gritty details and things you're going to have to work out. And then also a categorization of how niche the character is, so that if a character is only useful in a certain situation, they'll be very, very niche versus the broad opportunity to be useful in a lot of situations. Obviously, every character can be useful in one way or another, and there's lots of ways to add that utility in, but that's the general idea of what we're going to do. And we're going to start with Barbarian because, alphabet. Your Berserker is essentially your classic I am a raging barbarian who is dishing out extra damage using their frenzy ability and is resistant to charming and frightening effects, and gets the ability to attack people back when they are attacked. They also have the opportunity to create a fear effect as a bonus action at their highest levels. In terms of power, I would call the Berserker a 3 out of 4, as some of the other classes definitely have more potent options that will impact things a lot more than the Berserker will. But in terms of complexity, I would call it a 4, and in this case the higher number is the better number, because they are very simple to run and are going to be a lot of fun and just straight up damage dealing, which is also why I call it a niche of 1, because the Berserker Barbarian is pretty much focused all on just dealing damage just in combat, and has fairly minimal out of combat utility baked into the subclass. The Path of the Wildhound, on the other hand, is the rebake of the old Totem Warrior Barbarian, and includes the Bear Totem option that allows you to gain resistances to almost everything. The list of everything is smaller than it used to be, as now Force, Necrotic, Radiant, and Psychic still deal damage to you instead of just Psychic, so there's no more taking a Kalashtar Barbarian in order to have resistance to everything, but it's still a big improvement over straight up bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. But the real cool part about the Wildheart Barbarian is that they now get to choose their 3rd level and 14th level features every time they go into a rage, which, given the new larger number of rages you're going to be able to get in a day for a barbarian, means that they have a lot of utility to pick and choose between options that have all been built up so that Bear is no longer the only good possibility. In addition to that, we get the ability to speak with animals and commune with nature, and a once a day changing ability to either gain good dark vision or a speed type that is going to be useful to the situations that we're in. And what you have here is a nice potent subclass. In fact, on a general power scale, I would say because of the versatility of Path of the Wild Heart, as well as its ability to focus on getting as many hit points as possible, Path of the Wild Heart might still actually be the #1 subclass in terms of general power. In terms of complexity, it is interestingly the most complex, simply because you have to make choices on a regular basis when you go into your rages, which doesn't actually seem like it will be tremendously hard, but clearly just tells you how simple barbarians are supposed to be in the other subclasses. Finally, I would say that the Path of the Wild Heart, because of the ability to choose your different options on a regular basis, is the least niche, as there are are a number of the options that would still be useful in out-of-combat situations, and in different combats you're going to have different useful options depending on which Rage of the Wilds you're choosing. The Path of the World Tree comes in at number 2 in power scale because it has a number of abusable options built in through its levels, but most of those don't kick in until the higher tiers of play. At the beginning, you do gain the ability to gain temporary hit points when you rage and to grant them out to your party members, 1 per round, all of which disappear at the end of the rage, which is something I'd like to see baked into more temporary hit point granting opportunities. At 6th level, you get the ability to tank by teleporting your enemies to you and forcing them to stay with you so that they can't go targeting the rest of your party. And then at 10th level, you get reach, extra reach on all of your attacks, while at 14th level, you start teleporting around the battlefield like a crazy person for a bonus action every round, and can even teleport your entire group with you. But because of the fact that those really potent abilities are at 10th and 14th level, the overall power of this class doesn't kick in until you get up there. Keeping track of temporary hit points and who you're throwing them to at the lower levels, as well as utilizing this reaction opportunity to teleport your enemies to you and try to hold them in place, and the interactions between your Battering Roots ability at level 10 and your Brutal Strike ability at level 9, as well as your weapon masteries, makes this number 2 on the complexity scale as well, while keeping it relatively limited in niche because teleportation is always useful. This one comes in at 3 on the niche scale. Finally, the Zealot is the Warrior of the Gods, only Barbarian style, and gains Divine Fury to do extra damage on their attacks, can have a limited pool of healing that just doesn't quite scale up as much as maybe it should do, and is able to try and overcome failed saving throws and boost the saving throws and abilities of their allies, and eventually can go into a Paladin-esque sort of rage that allows them to fly around the battlefield, being resistant to certain kinds of damage, and even using their reaction to heal their party mates when they might fall unconscious. Nevertheless, despite the fact that the Divine Fury ability puts the Zealot Barbarian up there with the Berserker in terms of raw damage output, I would say that this is the least powerful subclass because it feels so scattered and broken about. It does come in at a 3 on complexity because each individual ability is relatively simple, and I would say it's a 2 on the niche because most of their abilities hit a different note and different space on the battlefield. But on we go to bards. The College of Dance is the new bard subclass that allows you to not only utilize your charisma as part of your armor class, but to dance around the battlefield, kicking people in the face with cool dance moves every time you use your bardic dice. On top of that, it gives you the ability to give evasion to your allies as you cluster up to avoid fireballs and dance out of the flames, and the ability to increase the initiative modifier of your entire group. This in particular puts the College of Dance at the top of the power list in general power, though there is a caveat I'll talk about when we get to Valor Bards. Nevertheless, on complexity, I would call this one a 2 out of 4, and in terms of niche, a 3 out of 4 because it's fairly widely viable to affect a lot of different situations. The College of Glamour is a classic that allows you to take on a fey beguiling appearance in order to move your allies around the battlefield, grant temporary hit points, command people and force them into doing silly things at your whims, and putting up an unbreakable majesty that causes people to no longer be able to attack you. However, it is somewhat limited in that your uses of each of these abilities feels more limited than a lot of the other bards, which is why I'm giving this one a 3 out of 4 for power. In complexity, I would say this one actually tops the charts at a number 1, as each and every one of their abilities requires a fair amount of page space in order to be able to understand, and in terms of niche, I'm calling it a 2 out of 4 compared to the other subclasses. The College of Lore is the classic bard from 3rd edition that is capable of knowing a little bit of everything and impacting a little bit of everywhere, with bonus skill proficiencies and the ability to reduce the attack rolls of enemies on the battlefield, as well as additional spells at an earlier level chosen from different spell lists, and the ability to boost their own skill rolls, the College of Lore Bard is useful in every situation, and reasonably potently so. I would call this a 2 out of 4 for power, while it's reasonably complex at a 3 out of 4, but is easily the least niche with a 4 out of 4 in the niche category. The College of Valor, on the other hand, is your combat bard, the Skald leading the forces into the fray, able to give their bardic inspiration so that their allies can increase their defenses or their offenses, and gaining the ability to use and wear armor and fight up close with extra attack, and the ability to cast their spells and still strike out with a melee weapon. This is kind of the warlord from the 4th edition days feel, and is a reasonably alright option that's fairly simple, but in terms of power feels very much on the low side unless and until you're getting access to incredibly potent and broken spells like Conjure Minor Elementals at level 10 and onwards, which is why I'm calling College of Valor a 4 in power until level 10, at which point they skyrocket their way up to number 1. In complexity, the College of Valor is actually super simple also, so it is a complexity of 4, but it's totally focused upon making a Gish bard, and that makes it number 1 in the niche category. On we go to the clerics. The life domain is a classic brought over from the 2014 book and is essentially your typical healer cleric, pumping out bigger numbers than normal on every spell thanks to Disciple of Life, being able to pick up everybody who's at super low hit points and bring them to half health with their Channel Divinity option, and being able to eventually not bother rolling and just taking maximum on their dice. The life domain subclass leans hard into healing. However, because it's only leading into healing, and because a handful of extra hit points for every casting is not as broke as it could be, I would call the life domain the least generally powerful of the subclasses with a 4. It's also, however, super simple to run, making it a number 4 in the complexity, but is the most niche as it focuses purely and solely upon healing at niche number 1. The light domain, on the other hand, was in 2014 very much the blaster's blaster of cleric, and now it's had that blaster side softened a little bit with a little bit more of the revelation side of magic. That said, you still have the ability to blow up in light and deal damage to your enemies around you while dispelling darkness, and you can create flashes of light around yourself or your allies in order to ward away attacks. And then at top levels, you gain the ability to start glowing so brightly that any of your enemies nearby have disadvantage against your fire and radiant damage spells and your Radiance of the Dawn ability, meaning you can just pile it on there. The light domain in general power tops my chart at number 1, while in complexity they're fairly simple at a number 2, and they're not even tremendously niche due to their focus now on the divinatory side and the creation of light, as well as their blasteriness, putting them in niche spot number 3. Then we have the trickery domain, another classic from 2014 that's been updated to try to make it a little bit more exciting. Though the blessing of the trickster remains pretty similar, the longer duration is nice, and Invoke Duplicity still allows us to create a duplicate of ourselves that we can cast spells through and that we can move around, and when it's close to us, it can provide us with some advantages in combat. At 6th level, we get almost unparalleled teleportation ability, as we can, every time we take a bonus action to move our duplicate, we can swap positions with them, which could get really confusing on the battlefield, but in a good way. And at 17th level, the confusion of our little duplicate running around starts aiding our allies as well, and when it ends, we can provide a tiny little burst of healing, probably the weakest of the capstones for the subclasses. And that, coupled with some of the other little things in there, is why I'm giving this a general power rating of 3, a complexity rating of 1, as keeping track of your echo thing around the battlefield and all of the different abilities and ways that they work in there is going to require you to do a little bit more tracking than some of the other subclasses. And a niche rating of 4, as being able to do those things is going to be widely applicable, not just in combat situations. Finally, the war domain is the smiting paladin style cleric, bringing the power of the gods to the battlefield. Guided Strike lets you use your channeled divinity to add a +10 now to either you or to another creature. And as a War Priest, you can make an extra attack as a bonus action, a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier, every short rest, meaning that you can essentially make 2 attacks a round as if you were a fighter from 3rd level on for just a little bit every day. You get the ability to cast Spiritual Weapon and Shield of Faith using your Channel Divinity without costing concentration, which, since they added concentration to Spiritual Weapon, is a pretty decent boost now. And at your capstone level, you gain resistance to all the physical damage types. I would call the War Domain potentially one of the more dippable Cleric subclasses, and it's definitely got a fair bit of power in there. I'm calling it a general power of 2, a complexity of 3 for the relatively simple abilities, but the need to track your concentration or lack thereof, etc., and a niche level of 2, as it is pretty focused on the straight damage. On we go to Druids. Circle of the Land is one of the more complex subclasses in that every day you're going to choose a different spell list, and those spell list choices are going to adjust some of the other benefits that you're gaining on a long rest basis, meaning you're going to have to make a fair amount of changes to your character sheet. You get to pick a land type every day, getting a spell list with that. You also gain an ability to create a fairly lackluster Withering Bloom style damage effect that also heals one of your allies in it, and you get the natural recovery ability, which is very similar to a wizard's arcane recovery to get more druid spells back. These are the fairly ultimate utility casters of having tons of options, lots of choices available to you, which of course explains why I would say that the land has the least niche ability overall. It is a niche rating of 4, while I would call it a power rating of 2, as that loads of choice leads to lots of juicy options that you can utilize. It's fairly up there at a complexity of 2, simply because you have to make all of those changes and choices, but once you've made them, it's relatively simple to refer to your character sheet to deal with what you're dealing with. Meanwhile, the Circle of the Moon, the Shapeshifter subclass, has gotten even more potent, with a load of great options added to them. They still get to turn into better forms, but now their armor class doesn't suck, and they have even more temporary hit points than the regular Druid, which did see a little bit of a nerf from the 2014 edition. Now they get a list of additional spells that they can cast even while they're in their bare form, which is going to give them a load of additional options in that regard, and they can deal radiant damage at 6th level and onwards, and very rarely lose concentration while adding their Constitution modifier of whatever form they're in and their Wisdom modifier to their con saves, not just for concentration, but it will be useful for that. And then at 10th level, they gain the ability to teleport all over the place and can just spend their spell slots to be able to keep this ability rolling all day long. And at 14th level, they can bring people along in their teleports and gain a smiting-like ability, which makes us wonder why barbarians couldn't have that at high levels without having to give up their advantage from their reckless attack. Circle of the Moon is potent and easily the most powerful once again, just like they were in 2014, coming in at a general power of 1. They are also still the most complex simply because you have to keep track of not just your class, but all of the different sets of stat blocks that you're going to be using when you shapeshift from one form to another. Perhaps even more so now that you can spend your spell slots to continue gaining more wild shape options. And because they are the shapeshifter and can access a lot of different animal abilities, they are not a terribly niche class and come in at niche 2. The Circle of the Sea is a weird subclass that was included that I'm not sure exactly what the design intent was behind. They gain the ability to create like a swirling vortex of water around them that is really, really close to them and allows them to push people away from them, but only allows them to do so on their turn. It does damage while it pushes people away, but is largely placed there as a defensive ability, even though you can only use it on your turn because it has such a small radius. At the very highest levels, you can put that ability onto another person, which makes it far more potent and useful, but until then you're gaining silly improvements like increasing from a 5-foot radius to a 10-foot radius and a swim speed at 6th level. At 10th level you do gain flight while using this emanation, which is pretty cool, but generally speaking this subclass just lacks cohesion, and because you would need to be putting yourself in harm's way in order to use your abilities the way that they seem to be intended until you get to top levels, I call it a power rating of 4. However, because the Wrath of the Sea is something that you'll be probably only rarely using for yourself, and the other abilities are simply glow-ups on that, I would say that it's relatively non-complicated at a complication of 4, but it's definitely going to be for a very niche build and is niche number 1. Finally, the Circle of the Stars is the cosmic druid that's pulling in power from the heavens and has an ability to take a starry form to either deal additional radiant damage and be better at mental skills and saving throws, as well as concentrating on spells, or to buff up their healing by being able to enhance a cast healed spell with an additional effective healing around the battlefield. They're very versatile and they have lots of opportunities to be able to impact lots of different situations. However, they're not incredibly potent, and the fact that the Circle of the Stars did not get a spell list to add to their spells means that they have far less options than anyone else in the Druid category. This is the reason why I'm giving Circle of the Stars a power of 3, even though I really love the subclass and there's a lot of great stuff in there. Of the subclasses, the Circle of the Stars requires the most amount of words to be able to say the same thing and has the most number of options at every level of their abilities that are improved. I call them more complex than the Circle of the Sea, though they're still easier to manage than the other two, giving them a complexity level of 3. And because they're fairly widely utilizable in a lot of different situations and their abilities impact so many different situations, I call them a niche of 3 also. On we go to the fighter, the master of weapons. And of course, it's fitting that we begin with the true weapon master, the battle master. These guys get superiority dice just like in 2014 that allow them to use lots of little spell-like effects on a round-by-round basis, and they get these back on a short rest, and they've gained some ability to be able to know the resistances and vulnerabilities of their opponents, and at high levels they can use their maneuvers a literal unlimited number of times per day, because once per turn they can use a d8, allowing them to do things like parry with their reaction every round and utilizing their own features without worrying about running out of superiority dices. The Battle Master was one of the best subclasses for fighter, and it is still one of the best subclasses for fighter. However, it's definitely the most complex, coming in at 1 on both of those scales. However, in terms of niche, though it has some abilities that impact things other than straight up combat, it is pretty much focused on just killing the enemy, and it has a niche rating of 2. The Champion, on the other hand, also from the 2014 book and glowed up into the new one, is the simple fighter. Its abilities are essentially always on all the time and designed to just make this an easy class to enjoy the fighter with. Getting critical hits on easier dice rolls and now gaining some extra movement based on their critical hits and having advantage on athletic skills and even gaining heroic inspiration on every single turn of combat. This is the reliable fighter that's going to always deliver. And incidentally, I actually think that this turns out to push it up in the power scale really nicely to where I would call this our power option number 2. From complexity, the Wizards team nailed it and kept it at a 4, making it the least complex class, but it is very much fixated only on what's happening during combat initiative, with the exception, of course, of athletics checks, making it a niche number 1. The Eldritch Knight is the fighter's attempt at making a Gish class, being able to weave magic in with their attacks in order to do both sword and spell. It has some fun little features in there that allow you to build on what you already have going on by casting cantrips in place of a single attack in a regular attack routine, teleporting when you use your action surge, and at the highest levels being able to weave a spell in exchange for the loss of a couple of attacks. But it does come in a package that requires a fighter to know spellcasting existing rules, and it's still a quarter caster, giving them only a relatively few spell slots to bring to bear. It no longer has some of the restrictions that made the Eldritch Knight challenging previously, and with all of the fighters being so good, it was a challenge, but I'm calling it number 3 in power scale. In terms of complexity, it is only beaten out by the next subclass we're going to talk about, and so we're calling this a complexity number 2. And for niche, because it's pretty fixated on the war spell casting, it doesn't have a lot of application to other situations, but better than some, so we're calling it a niche of 3. The final fighter subclass is the Psi Warrior, the psionic fighter that can dash across the field, throw up kinetic barriers to block harm from its allies, can thrust people away with telekinesis, or can fly across the battlefield by utilizing their mind. At top levels, they can gain the ability to telekinetically grab a hold of their foes and restrain them while they beat them to a pulp with their bonus action. And they're pretty stinking cool. However, they just don't quite match up to the other subclasses in terms of continuous power, making them a power scale of 4, while in complexity they have the most options that are interconnected and require the most tracking, making them our most complex subclass, but while having the most widely varied options available in terms of what they can affect and what situations they can change, giving them a niche rating of 4. Next up, the Monk, beginning with the Warrior of Mercy. We've seen the Mercy Monk previously, and it's definitely been brought in a good way. It allows you to make attacks that deal additional necrotic damage by expending your ki or doing flurries of blows, and or to be able to touch your allies and provide them with healer. A healer subclass for the Monk is a pretty cool and thematic option, and the Warrior of Mercy delivers on it pretty well. In fact, because Warriors of Mercy gain their key points back on a short rest, not to mention at other times nowadays, they can actually pump out some of the largest amounts of healing in a day that are possible of any of the classes if you are able to take rests on a regular basis. And this is one of the reasons why I classify the Warrior of Mercy as a power of 2. It's reasonably simple in how you can utilize their different abilities, though keeping track does mean it's not the most simple, giving a complexity rating of 3. However, its focus on healing actually makes it probably the most niched in Monk, as its options are pretty much deal damage or heal friends. This is contrasted quite quickly by the Warrior of Shadow, on the other hand, that has the ninja feel to it of creating darkness, seeing in that darkness and in the dark in general, and being able to create small, shadowy illusions. They're able to teleport within dim light and darkness without any kind of limitation on how many times per day, and gain advantage when they slip out of the dark and pummel you from behind. Higher levels can create their own shadows for that teleportation and be able to get free attacks, or can transform themselves into an invisible and almost incorporeal shadow that flits about the battlefield, delivering flurries of blows without expending any of their focus points. With all of these different opportunities and options, the Warrior Shadow is the least niched, but there are so many really powerful options that it's hard to rank them at the top end. I'm calling them a power rating of 3, complexity of 1 because of all those options, but also a niche of 4 because those options give them wide variety of choices. Meanwhile, the Warrior of the Elements is a complete redo of the old Warrior of the Elements, and has the ability to essentially punch you from a distance without having to worry about getting up close and personal. They deliver elemental damage, can create small explosions that are kind of weak sauce versions of a fireball, and at high levels can fly around the battlefield, trailing flames or raining acid down on their foes while avoiding opportunity attacks and just running an enormous amount of distance and delivering damage to everybody on the battlefield pretty much without fail. They're a leader in my book in terms of the overall power that they can dish out with a power of 1. They're reasonably non-complex, putting them at a complexity of 2, and while they are fairly niched in, they're slightly more niched than our final option, giving them a niche rating of 3. Final option is the Warrior of the Open Hand, which is the classic monk that is supposed to be as simple as it gets. And really, I think they nailed that pretty well. When you're using a flurry of blows, the attacks that they dish out can either knock you off balance so you don't get opportunity attacks, knock you prone, or push push you away. They have an additional ability to heal themselves at 6th level. At 11th level can use their Step of the Wind on top of whatever other ability that they're utilizing. And at 17th level have the classic Quivering Palm that sets up vibrations in their enemy that they can close off and lead to a sudden killing blow on somebody without even touching them afterwards. They just don't quite stack up in terms of overall power, giving them a power rating of 4 compared to these others, but they are indeed the simplest monk with a complexity rating of 4, and because of the great amount of speed that they're capable of and the versatility of options, I would call them a niche of 2. On we go to the Paladins. The Oath of Devotion Paladin is the classic knight in shining armor, able to use their great good looks, or their charisma, to aid them in their attack rolls and putting out an aura of devotion that protects people from being charmed and gives cover to people after they've caused smites, and then a holy aura of sunlight around them that glints off of their perfectly whitened teeth. The classic Paladin is probably the least powerful, with a power rating of 4, while they're also the least complex, with likewise a complexity rating of 4. They're not tremendously niche, and their spell list gives them a number of different decent options, so they come in at a niche rating of 3. The Glory Paladin, on the other hand, is our striving for the heights of heroism. They're the athletic, competitive paladin that's looking for glory. When they utilize their smites, they can use their Channel Divinity to give out temporary hit points. They get to use their Channel Divinity likewise to give themselves an hour of athletic prowess so that they can have advantage on athletics and acrobatics checks. And their high jumps and long jumps gain a whopping 10 feet of additional each, meaning that your average paladin can make a standing high jump of something like 15 feet straight up before grabbing onto a ledge 20-something feet over their heads in plate mail. Their Aura of Alacrity allows them to boost their own speed and the speed of their allies within their Aura of Protection, and a number of times a day they can use their reaction to attack people who are attacking their allies. Their Living Legend ability at the end allows them to reroll every failed saving throw as a reaction, and once per round to cause any miss to become a hit, as well as its Charisma opportunities to influence allies and enemies around them. The Oath of Glory is a pretty solid subclass. I'm giving it a power rating of 2, while it's also surprisingly one of the most complex, especially with that aura that allows people to gain speed when they enter your aura, so they have to run past you or start near you in order to pick up speed and move around the battlefield. And in a field of subclasses that aren't particularly complex, Oath of Glory tops my list at a complexity of 1. However, they do have a lot of wide variety, and they're actually able to do some interesting things in a lot of different situations. I'm calling them a niche of 4. The Oath of the Ancients is the Nature Paladin. They gain the ability to use their Channel Divinity to lock down people with restraining vines if they're within 15 feet of them. They have a cool little spell list and the ability to give resistance to otherworldly magic, like that does necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage, which makes them a great pairing with a Barbarian of the Wild Heart. They have an unfortunate 15th level ability, Undying Sentinel, that essentially just gives them the ability to pop back up if they're knocked down, but their Capstone ability at level 20 is probably one of the coolest, allowing them to regenerate hit points consistently, giving disadvantage on their spells and Channel Divinity options to anybody in their aura, and allowing them to cast their spells as a bonus action, which is pretty wild. Nonetheless, especially with the boring and requiring me to lose feature at level 15, I'm calling this a general power of 3 out of 4, while most of its abilities are fairly simple, giving it a complexity of 3 out of 4, but it is definitely the most niched in of the Paladin subclasses at niche level 1. Finally, the Oath of Vengeance Paladin is the Punisher, the paladin who's out to get revenge on whoever is doing the wrongs, and is sort of our Dark Knight opportunity to run a Batman or Punisher sort of character. Their Vow of Enmity is incredibly potent, allowing them to get advantage on attack rolls against a creature for the full minute that they've got this sort of marking influence upon them, and now they can even transfer it if their opponent hits 0 hit points before the end of the vow. They still get the ability to make opportunity attacks. When they score an opportunity attack, they shut down their foes, stopping them from fleeing away, and they can take attacks against their chosen prey with a reaction anytime it hits or misses with an attack roll. The Avenging Angel ability at their capstone gives them a fly speed and an aura of fear that are pretty on brand. Vengeance still tops the power list at general power of 1, while their focus upon the Vow of Enmity adds a slight bit of complication, putting them in complication number 2, and they are very much niched in at killing that individual target, giving them a niche value of 2. No matter what we have to say about the Ranger's capstone, we can at least talk about their subclasses with something that isn't just horror. The Beastmaster is the first of these and is the ubiquitous ranger with an awesome pet, and the pets are pretty stinking cool. Essentially, the ranger gets the ability to sacrifice either their bonus action or some of their attacks in order to cause their pet to launch its own attack and deal damage, and at higher levels the pet can make multiple attacks in exchange for the one attack or bonus action that you're sacrificing from your ranger. Depending on how you work it, this can mean that the ranger is actually able to pump out 5 attacks in a round if you're really working the dual-wielding fighter angle and you tweak it right. Their pets are pretty cool and fairly simple, but you do have to keep track of 2 creatures on the battlefield every single round and mixing and matching their movements and actions together, and so I would say that the Beastmaster comes in at a general power of 3, a complexity of 2, and is relatively niched in on the pet game at niche of 2. The Fey Wanderer, on the other hand, adds a touch of whimsy to our serious rangers. They get a tiny little bit of extra damage once per round that is barely notable, some cool spells on their free spells list, which notably Beastmasters and Hunters don't have, and they get to add their wisdom modifier to their charisma skills, giving them a lot of out-of-combat options. They can summon up Fey reinforcements, sometimes without using concentration, can Misty Step around the battlefield for free at really high levels, and can turn failed attempts to charm or frighten their group into frightening or charming influences upon their enemies. For all of their versatility, until you get to pretty incredible levels with the Fey Wanderer, I would still say that they're not terribly powerful, and I'm calling them a general power of 4. However, they are quite complex with all their different options at a complexity of 1, but they have the least niche feel to them, being applicable in almost any circumstance, and so I'm calling them a niche of 4. The Gloomstalker, on the other hand, is the ambusher that sneaks through the dark and is unseen by whatever lives there. The Dread Ambusher did take a pretty nasty hit in terms of overall power and opportunity to deal extra damage, but they do get their wisdom modifier on their initiative rolls, the speed boost, and that extra damage is still useful. Umbral Sight still allows them to avoid creatures' dark vision in the middle of the night, which is a huge and potent boon for staying hidden and thus invisible and gaining advantage on those initiative checks. And at top levels, they get to teleport for free anytime somebody hits or misses them as a reaction, which pretty much means they'll never have to face a multi-attack. I'm calling Gloomstalker our most powerful ranger subclass at power level 1, reasonably manageable on the complexity level at complexity of 3, and a niche of 3, given how not only are their abilities great for combat, but they have a lot of cool options in their spell list and in how cool Umbral Sight is that they can interact with things in a different way. Finally, we have the Hunter. Hunter's lore means that when they're using the overdone Hunter's Mark, they know the immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities of every creature that you're fighting, which is actually not a terrible boon. The fact that they now get the ability to switch between single target damage or group slaying on a short rest is a very nice quality of life improvement for this simple subclass. At higher levels, they gain the ability to escape with disadvantage on people's opportunity attacks, or to give disadvantage on multi-attacks used against them, the ability to give themselves resistance to whatever kind of damage is being thrown against them once per round, and which lasts until the end of their current turn, which is a huge power boost, and their Hunter's Mark can deal its damage to multiple targets from 11th level onwards. Because of the lack of a spell list and the focus upon combat only, I'm giving this a power rating of 2, while calling it our least complex with a 4, and our most niched in on combat with a 1. Onto the rogues. The Arcane Trickster is another Gish mixing of rogue with spellcaster, and unfortunately, it just doesn't quite come together as well as we would like. It did fix some of the problems that were plaguing the Arcane Trickster before, but it still comes in relatively complicated in exchange for a modicum of cool options and power. You can still cast spells and gain a quartercaster's spell list. You can now use Mage Hand as a bonus action, both to cast and to utilize, which actually makes it functional to the cool features that used to be useful to the Mage Hand, including the fact that it used to be able to give you advantage on attack rolls, but now that ability's gone, and instead, at high levels, when you use the trip option, you can let your Mage Hand trip somebody else while you're tripping a guy over here, which is niche cool, but not as good as we would like. If you are in hiding, then enemies that are targeted by your low-level spells do get disadvantage on their saving throws, and at high levels you can attempt to steal spells from your opponents, but it just doesn't land very well, especially given that your highest level spells you're ever going to cast are 4th anyway. I'm calling this a power rating of 4, complexity of 2, given all the spellcasting and the fact that you need to be able to parse together your little mage hand and stuff, and a niche of 2, as it's pretty focused in on this specific style of play. The Assassin, on the other hand, is the simple option for rogues, gaining advantage on all initiative, whether they're hiding or not, and advantage on attack rolls against anybody who hasn't taken their turn in the combat yet, in addition to dealing extra sneak attack damage to the first target in every combat. They gain some abilities to focus in on poison and on infiltration that give them a little bit less of a niche, but they pretty much fixate in on this specific infiltrate, sneak, and kill focus that makes them pretty tightly focused. I'm calling them a power of 3 because they're just such great options in the other 2 subclasses still to come, a complexity of 4 as intended, nice and simple, and a niched in option of 1 as they're focused in on the poison, disguise, and kill. Meanwhile, the Soul Knife is the psionic rogue and a potent option that was ported over with some minor adjustments. With their ability to use their psionic dice to talk telepathically with their group, to turn failures in their ability checks into successes, to deal psychic damage all the time instead of physical damage with probably the best weapon in the game, and make a bonus attack per round that still grants you your dexterity modifier if they want to, they are really, really good. Add into that when they miss later, they can just fix it using their psionic dice and can teleport around the battlefield, can go invisible a ridiculous number of times per day, and then can cause a 1-minute long stunning effect for a mere 3 of their psionic dice. They are incredibly potent and definitely top the general power scales at a number 1. However, that is a full write-up of more than a page of text in order to understand their abilities, and those abilities are slightly interconnected because of the psionic dice, making these number 1 the most complex, but because of the wide variety of options and availability of how their stuff works, they're very much not niched and are a niche of 3. Obviously, taking the role of least niched is the classic rogue thief. Their fast hands ability to use sleight of hand and utilize action on their turn means that they can be doing all sorts of crazy things with the much more defined equipment section from 3rd level onwards, allowing them to throw caltrops or ball bearings, to lock people up with manacles, or throw a grappling hook. They have tons of great options that allows them to interact with the world a little bit differently thanks to that one special ability. They also gain climb speeds and can use their dexterity for long jumps right off the bat at level 3, can sneak attack while maintaining their stealth when shooting for cover from 9th level onwards and only costing them 1 sneak attack dice to pull it off, and can use a wide variety of magic items in ways that you wouldn't expect, including using charged items without losing their charges and using scrolls from any class. Throw in at their capstone the ability to take 2 rounds in the first round of every fight, and what you have is the most versatile option on the field. I'm putting them at a power rating of 2, though they and Soul Knife are neck and neck. A complexity of 3 because they are most awesome when you are interacting with a lot of different extra rules that are held elsewhere in your books. and a niche value of 4 because they are pretty much awesome in any circumstance. As we're wending our way onward, we come to the Sorcerer and begin with the Aberrant Sorcery option. These psionic spellcasters are leaned a little bit too hard into the otherworldly theme in some of the descriptive text for my case. For my tastes, I would personally prefer that we were able to lean into the Mind Warrior Psionicist feel a little bit better without having to worry about weird mucus or otherworldly tentacles. But if you're into that kind of thing, then, go with the gods. They start with an ability to telepathically speak with other creatures, which is cool for being understood, but not necessarily as strong as I would have liked compared to some of the other options. The fact that you have to start within 30 feet, but then can speak to somebody within a number of miles of yourself equal to your charisma modifier is a little bit weird, especially since the duration is only 1 minute per sorcerer level. How many miles are you exactly expecting somebody to dash away from you in 5 minutes at level 5, for instance? Seems a bit strange. And it's a form of telepathy that requires you to know the same language as your target, which makes it a little bit weaker. They gain the ability at 6th level using Psionic Sorcery to cast the spells that they're getting memorized for free by utilizing their sorcery points instead of their spell slots, and when they do so, it doesn't have verbal or somatic components or simple material ones, meaning you can do so without people noticing that you are doing so, which for a mind-reading sorcerer is pretty stinking cool. They've got resistance to psychic damage, charming, and frightening, which is relatively useful. And they can use a revelation in flesh from 14th level onwards in order to adapt to their circumstances with either swimming or flying or seeing invisible things or crawling through tiny little spaces, all of which are pretty cool movement options for a single sorcery point per. Their final ability is the ability to teleport while creating a warping implosion where they once were, and it costs them 5 sorcery points to repeat. It's pretty cool, but not world-changing. The real thing that gives this one a power rating of 2 for me is the Psionic spell's ability to cast subtly with added on to the other cool options that they have. I would say, however, that this is the second most complex of the 4 subtypes, so it's getting a rating of 2 out of 4 for complexity, but has one of the widest applications and is focused on versatility and options to be used in a lot of different situations, so I'm giving it a niche value of 4. I would say that the sorcerers are all kind of close together when it comes to niche value in this particular subsection. The Clockwork Sorcerer is basically all about finding balance. It's about removing disadvantages or advantages from people around and leveling things off to normal dice, creating shields of order that cost sorcery points in order to gain d8s of warding around creatures, which could be nice if you're using it with your leftover points right before you're going to regain your sorcery points at higher levels, but it's not tremendously potent otherwise. And at 14th level, it really comes online with the ability to enter a state where basically any dice that you roll, you can't benefit from advantage, but you always roll at least a 10 on the dice. And their top level ability is this sort of weird wipe the battle slate clean as you fix every object in the area, dispel every spell of 6th level or lower, and provide some healing among the creatures of your choice. Because of the potency of the Trance of Order and the ability to influence other creatures on the battlefield and negate their special circumstances or the things that are holding your party back, the Clockwork Sorcerer comes in at a general power rating of 1 for me. They're not tremendously complex, though you do need to focus on your reaction game a little bit, so I'm giving them a complexity of 3, and they are definitely not niched in on a specific form of play, particularly since you can use their Restore Balance and Trance of Order abilities whether you're in or out of combat, so I'm calling them a niche rating of 3. On the other hand, the Draconic Sorcerer definitely hits the niche category pretty hard. Being able to gain extra hit points and use your Charisma modifier for armor class makes them the toughest sorcerer for certain, and they get to add extra damage to their chosen affinity from 6th level onwards, eventually gain wings, and using the Summon Dragon spell without it costing them concentration, which is a pretty awesome boon for the subclass, though not until 18th level. Their pretty much focused on doing one thing and doing one thing only, which is why I'm calling them a general power of 3, but they're very much the simple man's option with a complexity rating of 4, and they are niched in on damage, coming in at number 1 with no surprise to anyone there. Meanwhile, the Wild Magic Sorcerer kind of got the shaft in one regard in exchange for this strange and wonderful Wild Magic table that has leaned a little bit harder into giving good options and a little bit lighter into the terrifying things going wrong feel that we used to get. However, their ability to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table is still very random and very rare on their first ability, but has now been canonized as being very easy to control using your Tides of Chaos, allowing you to recharge your advantage that you're getting on a regular basis by casting spells. And when you do so, forcing that spell to have a Wild Surge as well. At level 6, you gain the ability to bend luck, which allows you to impact dice rolls that are happening around yourself at a cost of a single sorcery point and your reaction. At 14th level, you gain some control over the Wild Magic Surge table, and at level 18, complete control, but only once per day. The big holdups to the Wild Magic Sorcerer that kept it from being truly great is that they're the only one with a capstone that only can be used once per day with no option to recharge it, and the fact that the Wild Magic Sorcerer didn't get an additional spells prepared list, meaning they have 10 less spells than any other sorcerer. This is why I'm giving them a power rating of 4, even though I think that they have opportunity for moments of greatness. They're the most complex simply because you're going to have to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table on a regular basis and manage both your reactions and sorcery points and your Tides of Chaos ability, but they're not tremendously niched in because they can impact the battlefield in so many different ways, or use their sorcery points to impact non-combat with their Bend Luck and Tides of Chaos ability. So I'm calling them a niche of 2. On we go to the Warlock, which I feel like finally has a number of more options for a full class Warlock instead of them being the ubiquitous dip that I have generally seen amongst optimizers. Now, optimizing and dipping is still easier than ever before, but we'll see how these ones go, because I know I would like to play some of these subclasses. The Archfey Patron is the patron of teleportation, it seems, as the Steps of the Fey ability gives the Warlock the ability to cast Misty Step without expending a spell slot, charisma modifier times per day, and can gain additional benefits to doing so of either taunting enemies to come after them or providing some temporary hit points to those around them. At 6th level, that gets enhanced with the ability to cast Misty Step as a reaction in response to taking damage, and they can potentially be invisible or cause fear in the people around them, which is pretty sweet too. Adding to their desire to decide between their various reactions, their 10th level ability allows them to take less damage and force that damage back on their attacker as psychic damage, and they're able to refresh the use of it with their Pack Magic spell slots. And finally, their level 14 ability is just a wild teleporting around the battlefield craziness, as now any enchantment and illusion spell that they cast using a spell slot has a Misty Step baked into it without even costing a bonus action. And keep in mind that that also triggers their opportunities to add little riders to their teleport that we talked about earlier. Teleportation is such a useful power that I thought the Archfey Patron was going to be the most powerful directly, but I didn't anticipate how cool the other subclasses were. I'm calling this a power level of 3 out of 4, while it's a complexity rating of 2, simply because it's a lot of little choices and interconnected mechanics, and it's niched in at a 4 because teleportation helps in a surprising number of scenarios, even though this is a very battle-focused subclass. Speaking of battle-focused subclasses, the Celestial Patron is not exactly that while being that. It gains a pool of healing dice at 3rd level, a focus on radiant damage that would pair well with a Cleric of Light at 6th, a very inspiring leader-esque ability to grant temporary hit points when you use your magical cunning feature or finish a short rest at 10th level that won't stack and is probably not worth the paper it's written on in most groups, and an ability at level 14 that relies upon your party to be lying on the ground making death saving throws. I'm definitely calling this new Celestial Patron a general power level of 4. It is not incredibly potent and not terribly well designed in my opinion. It's fairly non-complicated, so I'm giving it a complexity rating of 3, but it is totally niched in on not only the healing of your party mates, but the desire for them to already be suffering badly in order for your abilities to do the best that they can. All in all, I was kind of disappointed. The Fiend Patron was the classic Warlock who's made a deal with the Dark Power and continues to fulfill its role as the simple option that kicks Major Tookus. Dark Blessing got a huge boost in that now you don't need to be the one that drops somebody to 0 hit points in order for you to gain your temporary hit points, and since you're getting Charisma mod plus your Warlock level every time an enemy goes down to 0 hit points within 10 feet of you, I hope you're turning this into a Pact of the Blade Warlock, because that is a lot of temporary hit points consistently refreshing in a lot of campaigns. Your fiendish spells are all devilishly themed with poison and fiery themes that are dishing out the damage, and your Dark One's own luck ability makes it likely that you'll pass that all-important saving throw. Fiendish Resilience allows you to pick and choose the specific damage resistance that you need, and you can pick anything except Force every short rest. And Hurl Through Hell continues to be a pretty potent single-target damage option as you banish someone to the outer planes and take them out of the battlefield until the end of your next turn, giving you plenty of time to deal with whatever else is still on the battlefield. I originally put the Fiend Patron at a power level of 1, specifically because of all those temporary hit points, but I'm actually going to call it a general power of 2 because of our next subclass. However, it is still the simple subclass with a complexity of 4, and it is niched in pretty hard on battle, so we're calling it a niche of 2. Finally, the Great Old One Patron is the Kraken speaking from the far realm into the mind of our tentacular Warlock. They get an Awakened Mind feature for telepathic communication with all of the same weirdness as the Aberrant Sorcerer. They get to cast any and all enchantment and illusion spells without verbal and somatic components, meaning they're subtly casting all the time on those subtypes, and they can change the damage type of any spell that deals damage to psychic damage, which is going to give them a lot of great versatility, especially since this applies to their cantrips too. However, the real oomph comes in when at level 6 they're able to create their telepathic bond with an enemy and force a wisdom saving throw, or they get advantage on all of their attack rolls against the creature, and the creature has disadvantage on all of its attack rolls against them for the entire duration of the bond. And they refresh this every short rest or by utilizing a pack spell slot. At level 10, their Hex gets even more weird, as not only are they able to restrict people's ability checks and thus skills, but now they're providing disadvantage on saving throws of their choice as well, allowing them to double down on the enchantment spells that they're likely to deliver subtly with their Hex. Their level 10 ability allows them to punish anybody who's using psychic damage against your group by having resistance to psychic damage, but dealing the damage they take back to anybody who dealt it to them. And at level 17, not only do they get the ability to summon up their aberrations without it costing them concentration, but they can do so with additional temporary hit points and with an additional damage equal to their Hex that's on the target every round. All these reasons combine as to why I think the Great Old One Patron tops the charts at general power of 1. They're also the most complex with these little moving parts that interconnect together, but they are not tremendously niched, as their focus on enchantments and illusions and the ability to use those subtly allows them to interact in all sorts of interesting manners with encounters, both combat and otherwise. Niche of 3 for these guys. Here we are at the Wizard, and I was really hoping that Wizards were going to get an additional boost to the number of spells that they had prepared, onwards so that they could compete with sorcerers and druids and clerics, but unfortunately that was not to be. But that's a topic for a whole different video. In the subclass department, we start out with the Abjurer, which is our banisher and our shielder, the one with the most hit points, hardest to kill wizard in the book. Their arcane ward remains pretty much the same as it was previously, though you can waste a spell slot with a bonus action in order to give yourself a couple of hit points instead of casting an abjuration spell, but I would use that pretty rarely. They can still project the ward from level 6 onwards to be able to protect allies instead of just themselves, and now they have the counterspell and dispel magic spells always prepared at level 10 and can cast dispel magic as a bonus action, which was an interesting feature that I didn't really expect them to throw in there. Incidentally, when they cast counterspell or dispel magic using a spell slot, they no longer expend the spell slot if they fail to dispel the magic involved. The wording on this is kind of careful, so you can't just bonus action cast dispel magic on everything that you see, and if there's no spell there in the first place, you would still expend your spell slot. But it does mean that you can counterspell safely every round, and if you are failing to outdo your opponent on the counterspell, you're not losing all your spell slots in the effort. This is going to extend their repertoire a little bit, and in a nice way. At 14th level, they still have advantage on all saves versus spells and resistance to all damage caused by spells. They come in at a power level of 4, a complexity of 3, and are the most niched on defense at niche 1. The Diviner is our prototypical wizard that learns everything from beyond, and they continue to have the awesome portent feature that they had in 2014. They still gain the expert divination ability to regain spell slots of lower levels than the ones that they've cast if they're casting a divination spell, though there has been language added so they can't get any additional slots above level 5. Their bonus eye has definitely been improved, taking only a bonus action now and lasting until the start of their next short or long rest, recharging on a short rest also, and giving them either 120-foot dark vision, see invisibility at will without expending a spell slot, or the ability to read any language. And at level 14, they get an extra portent dice just like before. Diviners are still super potent. That ability is still awesome. They come in at power level 2. They're not tremendously complex with a complexity of 4, and they're not very niched in with a niche of 4, making them kind of a winner in the overall number game. The Evoker's the guy who blows things up, and it saw only some minor changes, a little bit of a tweak around in the levels that you got different things. They get to have their potent cantrip ability from level 3 onwards, which is going to give it a lot more usability, which is nice. So now when they miss with an attack roll or somebody passes their saving throw, they still deal a little bit of damage. Their ability to sculpt spells comes in at 6th level so that they can fire fireballs from 6th level onwards without worrying about harming all of their companions. They get to add their intelligence modifier to damage to 1 damage roll of a spell from 10th level onwards, and they have their overchannel ability to deal maximum damage with a 1st through 5th level spell starting at 14th level. Interestingly, I don't think that this is the most powerful option there, and in fact put it behind the Diviner simply because of how cool portent is, and so I'm calling this a general power of 4. It is, however, the least complex, super straightforward, all about that one thing, is a complexity of 4, but is very niched in at a niche level of 2. Finally, the Illusionist. The Illusionist has seen a lot of changes that definitely improved it. They can now cast illusions without verbal components, meaning that they can sneakily hide and cast spells from off the side of the stage and be able to use all their cool illusion options. Their minor illusion cantrip, which they get for free, still has the visual and auditory effects built in at the same time for one casting instead of needing multiples. At 6th level, they get to summon phantasmal versions of beasts or fae using those spells, and can cast one of the 2 of those a day without using a spell slot in exchange for the creature coming out very fragile and with less hit points. And those spells count as illusions, meaning no verbal components too. At 10th level onward, they can avoid attacks against them by using their reaction to interpose an illusion, and can expend 2nd level spell slots to recharge that repeatedly throughout the day. And finally, they still gain the ability to make an object that that they've created with their illusions real as a bonus action from 14th level onwards. Illusions are incredibly versatile. The ability to avoid verbal makes them far more powerful in being able to utilize things interesting ways. I'm putting them at a general power of 1 with a complexity of 1 because illusions just take so much more work to be able to fully realize, and a niching of 3 as they are widely varied in their use. Only heroes make it all the way to the end of the video, so congratulations. Don't forget to check out the GM Philosopher using this link here, and until next time, thanks for watching and happy adventuring.